Would lighting a match be enough to illuminate endless darkness? Would saving one more person be equivalent to saving the whole world? No God ever gave even a hint to the Jews who survived the Holocaust. But they found their answer in a mortal who started as a local opportunist and became their savior. In September 1939, the German army quickly defeated the Polish army, and Poland was one of the world's largest Jewish population centers at the time. Due to historical and religious reasons, Germany considered Jews the root of all evil and the disruptors of human order. More importantly, Jews controlled a significant amount of wealth. Germany, constantly at war, needed a lot of funds. So, after occupying Poland, the German army began large-scale registration of Jews, and they were forcibly moved to designated cities in preparation for the next steps. During times of social unrest, opportunists often emerge, and Schindler was one of them. He was tall, well-dressed, and gave the impression of being a well-educated, wealthy man. Only he knew that he had failed in business several times before. A Nazi badge with black enamel and gold trim revealed his identity as a Nazi party member. Historically, Schindler was not only a Nazi member but also a spy. However, these details are unimportant in the movie. What matters is that he was very shrewd and knew how to spend money. He understood that money was the best passport in this world. With a small tip, he followed a smiling waiter into a softly singing and dancing restaurant. After sitting down, his deep eyes, like those of a hawk, searched for his prey. Soon, he focused on two German officers in well-pressed uniforms. After checking their ranks, he knew they weren't his target prey. It was the owner of a reserved table that was his ultimate prey. Then a German officer with a higher rank walked into the restaurant. He knew that to capture the ultimate prey, he sometimes needed to catch other prey as bait. With another small tip, he quickly called the waiter to his side. He instructed the waiter to send a bottle of fine wine to the officer, and soon the wine was delivered. The officer didn't know Schindler, and his intense curiosity led him to arrange for his subordinates to investigate Schindler's identity. Schindler not only knew how to spend money but was also very sociable. After a few words, the subordinate who came to investigate him smiled and sat down to chat amiably. The German officer became even more curious and couldn't help but leave his seat and approach. Schindler, like a warm host, proactively engaged with the officer and his companion in a gentlemanly and friendly manner. Who in this world would refuse a generous and enthusiastic new friend? Soon, Schindler was sitting at a table with all the German officers in the restaurant. Schindler quickly fostered a warm and friendly atmosphere with these officers. Like old friends, a series of photos of him with the German officers seemed to prove all this to everyone. Finally, he piqued the curiosity of the biggest prey, who approached on his own. Thus, Schindler gained his first capital in Poland, connections within the military. Next, Schindler went to the Jewish Council, which was essentially a puppet organization set up by the German army. It was responsible for implementing all management measures against the Jews on behalf of the army. Schindler found one of the council members, Stern, because Stern had previously worked as an accountant at a kitchenware manufacturing company. And more importantly, he had extensive connections in the Jewish business community. Schindler sought him out to find Jewish investors who could help finance the purchase of a kitchenware factory. In return, these investors would receive kitchenware to trade on the black market. Stern himself could also take a managerial position at Schindler's factory. As the situation grew increasingly tense, Jews were being forcibly relocated in batches to a completely enclosed ghetto. With Stern's mediation, many Jewish business magnates met with Schindler. Once these Jews entered the ghetto, regardless of their previous wealth, all their currency would become worthless. Physical goods like kitchenware were the true hard currency in the ghetto. The shrewd Jews understood their predicament and quickly invested their money with Schindler. With the investment, Schindler immediately acquired the kitchenware factory and began hiring Jews en masse. Compared to Poles, Jewish labor was much cheaper. With just a small payment to the military, he could use the Jews from the ghetto for production. For the Jews in the ghetto, although there was no compensation, working outside the ghetto offered some security for their lives and the opportunity to trade for living supplies. The kind and resourceful Stern used this opportunity to persuade unskilled Jews to join Schindler's factory. According to the policies at the time, such unskilled individuals were considered worthless. They would have to be re-registered, with an uncertain fate. To allow these Jews deemed worthless to work at Schindler's factory, Stern forged one certificate after another, pulling these Jews back from the pendulum of fate. Once the required number of workers for Schindler's factory was met, Stern quickly began pre-job training, hoping they could appear as experienced production workers. Schindler then began hiring his secretaries, with many young and beautiful women applying. The assessment involved proficient use of the typewriter, though these young women's typing skills left much to be desired. Schindler watched their beautiful faces with interest, offering a gentlemanly smile. The older woman with a cigarette, adept at using the typewriter, failed to catch Schindler's interest. Schindler knew that he didn't need them to be expert typists. Youth, beauty, perfect curves, and feminine charm were their lethal skills. Thus, a PR team of several young and beautiful girls was born at Schindler's. Soon, this PR team began their mission of entertaining German officers. Of course, in addition to beauties, there had to be gourmet food and fine wine. The dual pleasures of taste and flesh would make these German officers defenseless. Gourmet food and fine wine were scarce resources at the time. Schindler went to the secret trading location of the Jewish underground black market. His appearance caused the frightened Jews to leave one after another. A brave young man, however, struck a deal with him. Through this young man's network, Schindler was able to buy a large amount of rare delicacies and wine. These rare resources were then made into exquisite gift baskets and placed on the desks of the German officers. These officers recalled and praised the many benefits of their generous friend. One military order after another flooded into Schindler's factory like snowflakes. Trucks loaded with goods sped off in all directions, bringing Schindler considerable income. Success in business made the already romantic Schindler a groom every night. His wife from back home suddenly arrived and witnessed it all. In the end, his wife chose to forgive him and began appearing with him at various events as a couple. But even with his wife present, the flirtatious Schindler couldn't help but exchange glances with other beautiful women. Perhaps being flirtatious was in his blood. Without his later redemption of the Jews and his own redemption, we could objectively say that he was merely a womanizing, profit-driven opportunist. Ultimately, his wife returned to their hometown, unable to bear that people around her didn't know she was the real Mrs. Schindler. After his wife left, Schindler returned to his previous lifestyle, which satisfied him greatly. To him, employing Jews was only because they were cheap. It didn't involve any sympathy. Yet, the Jews who were sheltered in the factory, thanks to Stern's clever arrangements, felt immense gratitude towards him. An old man with one arm would wait outside his office every day just to thank him in person. At Stern's insistence, Schindler reluctantly agreed to meet this old man. As soon as they met, the old man started babbling his thanks to Schindler, who was clearly dismissive. Eventually, Schindler sat down with a face full of impatience, not even looking at the old man, not wanting to continue the charade. Schindler knew these people were brought in by Stern. Out of respect for Stern, Schindler only instructed him not to recruit such workers in the future. He hadn't realized that his once hardened heart would soften even a little because of this one-armed old man. One day, as usual, the workers were walking to Schindler's factory. Although the weather was cold and the road was covered with thick snow, their faces were filled with relaxed smiles. A group of German soldiers arrived in cars, stopped them without a word, and ordered them to clear the snow. The one-armed old man stood out as too different. In the eyes of the German soldiers, he was old and useless, unfit to live in this world. The executioners took him away, like squashing a bug. A gunshot rang out, and the old man fell to the ground. The other Jews did not dare stop their work, nor did they dare to express any sorrow. Hot blood could melt the cold snow, but it couldn't stir a ripple in the executioners' hearts, whether it was because of the factory's shutdown or the old man's death. Schindler felt a twinge of anger towards the German soldiers. He found a friendly officer to vent his dissatisfaction. He emphasized that the one-armed old man was a skilled press operator at his factory. What angered Schindler even more was that his important assistant, Stern, was also arrested by the Germans for not carrying his work permit one day. Schindler anxiously rushed to the train station, found Stern on a train that had already started, and immediately ordered the train to stop, saving Stern. Perhaps Schindler himself didn't know why he was so concerned about Stern. Was he afraid the factory would shut down? Or had he developed different feelings for Stern? He couldn't say. He only knew that if he had arrived 5 minutes later, Stern's fate would have changed forever. At this train station, workers were unloading luggage and skillfully sorting the items. These belongings were left behind by the Jews on the train, clothes and shoes piled high, valuables displayed on shelves. The lively faces in the photos once belonged to someone's father and mother, someone's husband and wife, someone's son and daughter. They once looked at the world with happiness and joy, never imagining that the end of their world would be colorless ashes. Watches, jewelry, diamonds, these wouldn't lose their value because their owners were gone. Those being appraised were being re-evaluated and categorized. A pile of gold teeth, forcibly extracted, lay lifeless in front of the appraiser. His gaze became vacant. as if a layer of fog had settled in his eyes. He knew that each gold tooth might represent a life, but time would not stop moving forward. Even in the face of such evil, the Jews in the ghetto numbed themselves, thinking that life wasn't too bad yet. Little did they know that new policies came quietly with the arrival of Lieutenant Aman. Casting a shadow, the ghetto was to be divided into two areas, one for those working for the Germans and skilled workers, and the other for the rest, including the elderly, the sick, and the weak. Aman didn't care about this. He cared about whether his residence was luxurious and how to choose a maid from a group of young women. He set his eyes on Helen, among the group, even stepping back gracefully, afraid of infecting her with his cold. This small gesture might make one think that Aman was a humane German officer, but we were wrong. He was just a butcher. When a Jewish architect pointed out a fatal flaw in the construction of the concentration camp, Aman immediately ordered his subordinates to execute him on the spot. He then arranged for the construction to be redone according to the architect's suggestions. His reasoning was simple. Jews had no right to argue with him. As the concentration camp was completed, Jews from the ghetto began being driven into the camp. Those who disobeyed were shot on the spot. Death loomed over the ghetto like a dark cloud. Schindler rode his horse to the hilltop to witness what was about to happen in the ghetto. Jews who were not useful as labor were executed on the spot, while others were driven out of their homes, ready to be sent to the camp. A Jewish family hid their carefully kept jewelry and bread, distributing it among family members to swallow. They had no hope of reunion, only wishing that these pieces of jewelry might help them survive in desperate times. In a hospital, doctors who should have been saving lives drew poison into syringes, dripping it into medicine cups. Nurses, almost racing against time, fed the poison-laced medicine to bedridden patients. The patients, knowing they were drinking poison, wore peaceful expressions, some even with smiles and gratitude. They knew this was the best way to die that they could choose, and it was the last dignity the medical staff could offer them. A woman, lucky enough to escape with her daughter, brought her to a hiding place. The owner only allowed her daughter to enter. The woman had no choice but to find another place to hide. Downstairs, she encountered a boy working for the Germans. Seeing her, the boy blew his whistle, only to realize she was his classmate's mother. He then arranged for her to hide under the stairs, evading the German search. The daughter, worried about her mother, ran out of the safe hiding place and reunited with her. Hugging tightly, the boy used his authority to place the mother and daughter in a safe group. In war, human lives are as fragile as grass, and a child's decision could determine life or death. This was a tragic and distorted world. Schindler watched the chaotic and terrifying streets from the hilltop, noticing a small red figure in the black and white streets and crowds. The red figure stood out. It was a lovely little girl, weaving through the streets, seemingly searching for her family. Like a red thorn piercing Schindler's heart, the small, vibrant red figure slipped into a building, like a frightened bird hiding under a bed. Eyes wide with fear, hands covering her ears, watching the disappearance of such a small red figure, Schindler seemed to start seriously questioning whether his beloved country, his loyal organization, and the army he befriended were truly right in what they were doing. Unable to bear witnessing this hellish scene any longer, he rode away, his emotions complex. At night, the Germans searched every corner, looking for hidden Jews. Once found, they were gunned down by machine guns, the muzzle flash reflecting on the Germans' grim faces, casting shadows that made them resemble devils. This was a nation that had produced many excellent musicians, but also one that had bred countless cold-blooded, bloodthirsty killing machines. At this moment, the piano no longer played pleasant notes, but the wails of death. Countless flames rose between the silent buildings, announcing the annihilation of many vibrant lives. The Jews captured and taken to the concentration camp entered what was essentially a slaughterhouse where death could come at any moment. Bored, Aman stood on the balcony of his villa, casually aiming his rifle at the Jews in the camp. His relaxed demeanor was as if he were aiming at a field mouse on a morning farm. A Jewish man tying his shoelaces caught his attention, and with a gunshot, the man fell. Then, a Jewish man resting on the steps also fell with another gunshot. Aman felt a sense of ease, as if stretching his muscles and bones. Schindler looked at the now empty factory, feeling complex emotions. All his workers had been captured and sent to the concentration camp. He went to the camp and found Aman, faced with huge profits. Aman agreed to return the workers detained in the camp, but kept stern to monitor all of Schindler's accounts. Schindler called in his team of beautiful women to lavishly entertain Aman and the other officers. Taking advantage of Aman being engrossed in laughter, Schindler approached the camp entrance and gave the guards some benefits. finally getting to see Stern. Stern meticulously explained every detail to Schindler, including the monthly factory accounts and the gift list. Overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity, Schindler angrily stopped Stern. He finally realized that Stern was even more important than he had imagined. Without him, these trivial matters would have suffocated Schindler. Schindler then quietly handed over the food he brought to Stern. Compared to Schindler's factory, the factory inside the camp was like hell. As a new batch of labor was coming, Aman planned to make space. This meant that some existing workers had to be killed. Under his timing, a worker skillfully made a hinge, but he still couldn't escape his fate. Because the hinge he made that day was too ugly, he was taken out of the factory to be executed. Kneeling on the ground, he waited in panic for the gunshot, helplessly explaining, the wait for death was suffocating, and as if by divine intervention, Aman's gun jammed. Several attempts to pull the trigger failed to produce a shot, and in a fit of rage, Aman smashed the butt of the gun against the worker's head, sparing his life. Schindler came to visit Stern as promised. Stern proposed transferring the spared worker to Schindler's factory. Schindler reluctantly handed over his lighter to Stern. Because of this lighter, the worker successfully came to Schindler's factory. Due to the theft of a chicken, dozens of Jews were called out by Aman for questioning, but no one confessed. Aman raised his gun and shot someone at random. As he raised his gun again, a trembling child stood up and told Aman that the thief was the Jew he had just killed. This child's bravery and wit saved dozens of adults. To reward the child, Stern proposed transferring the boy to Schindler's factory in another meeting. Schindler reluctantly handed over his cigarette case to Stern. Because of this cigarette case, the boy also successfully came to Schindler's factory. A woman came to Schindler's factory, wanting to see him. Seeing her shabby appearance, Schindler had no interest in meeting her. The woman returned home, dressed up carefully, and borrowed a fashionable dress to visit Schindler again. This time, Schindler agreed to see her. She sought Schindler because she had heard many say that he was a kind man. His factory was a shelter for Jews. She begged Schindler to save her parents from the concentration camp. Schindler was furious. He didn't care about anyone's life or death. He only cared about whether his workers could make him money. He scared the woman away and then stormed to find Stern. He knew it must have been Stern who sent the woman to him. After a tirade of anger and complaints, Schindler still pulled out a piece of paper and read out the names of the woman's parents. Before leaving, he handed over his wristwatch to Stern. This opportunistic businessman, this womanizing playboy, this man who never cared about human lives, only his business. At that moment, he unconsciously began to shine with humanity. If Stern's previous arrangements had passively led him to save many, from this moment on, he began to save people actively. War brings out the most brutal bestiality in humans, but it never completely erases humanity. Sometimes, it's just covered in the dust of war. A bit of wind and rain can blow away the dust, revealing what it should be. Because of the watch, the woman's parents also successfully came to Schindler's factory. The woman stood quietly on the other side of the road, watching all this with joy, then turned and left. She looked up at Schindler's office and smiled in gratitude. She must have thought, people were right. Schindler truly is a kind man. It seemed that the conscience in his heart had been gradually awakened, and Schindler noticed Helen. He went to the basement and handed a piece of chocolate to the frightened woman. Helen had heard of Schindler's name before. The long-term life of fear had made her forget the instinct to confide. It was Schindler who rekindled her desire to confide. In the dimly lit basement, Helen recounted her experiences and fears. Aman's capriciousness and random killings made her feel like every day was a year. She didn't know when or why she, too, would eventually die at Amans' hands. Schindler noticed Aman's affection for Helen. He knelt and gently comforted Helen, even tenderly kissing her forehead. Though Schindler was a playboy, this kiss was not lustful. Helen, though terrified, felt a gentle strength. She hadn't felt such a kiss or kindness in a long time and began to cry uncontrollably. After the revelry, Schindler and Aman had their first heartfelt conversation on the balcony where Aman often shot people. Schindler told Aman that true power is when we have every justification to kill, but we don't. Schindler's words seemed to touch the softest part of Aman's heart. Perhaps in his many meetings with Schindler, Aman began to admire Schindler, a well-dressed, elegant man with an indescribable charm, and wanted to become the kind of person Schindler described. When a Jewish boy accidentally dropped Aman's saddle on the ground, Aman, who usually would have killed someone for such an offense, chose to pardon him this time. Stern, witnessing this, left with a smile, thinking that Schindler had managed to influence this ruthless killer, awakening his conscience. As Aman rode through the camp, a guard was dragging a Jew out by the hair. accusing him of smoking in the workshop. Aman casually told the guard to inform the man not to smoke again and walked away, leaving the guard stunned and unable to believe what had just happened. The same Jewish boy was scrubbing Aman's bathtub with all his might. When Aman entered, the boy stood up, trembling, and explained that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remove the stubborn stains. Aman, once again, casually pardoned him. After the boy left, Aman looked at himself in the mirror, relishing the noble power of granting mercy. He seemed to see another side of himself, someone with true power. Suddenly, he noticed a small spot of dirt on his fingertip. He looked at the bathtub and realized that it wasn't an impossible stain. The devilish look reappeared on his face. A gunshot rang out, hitting the ground beside the boy as he walked back to the camp. Confused, the boy continued walking, and another shot hit the ground near him. Normally, Aman would kill with a single shot, but this time he missed twice, perhaps struggling internally. Ultimately, his beastly nature prevailed, and with the third shot, the boy fell in a pool of blood. Stern, passing by, finally understood that some people's bloodthirsty nature was innate. Temporary change was just an occasional miracle. Helen was grooming Aman's nails, while Aman pretended to flip through the newspaper, trying to get closer to Helen to catch her scent. His twisted love for Helen made him see her as both a danger and a temptation. Eventually, he couldn't resist visiting Helen's basement, awkwardly striking up a conversation. He wanted to be close but didn't dare. He wanted to touch but hesitated. As he circled around the tense Helen, he seemed to relax a bit and began to touch her hair. Looking into her eyes, he gathered the courage to kiss her but stopped. Seeing her as a temptation, his resentment for what he couldn't have was sickeningly vented on Helen. The pathological environment and thinking fostered Aman's twisted love. His natural feelings were constantly entangled and conflicted with his identity and so-called duties, resulting in contradictory and sick behaviors. Schindler, on the other hand, expressed his feelings naturally. At his birthday party, 2 Jewish girls blessed him, and in front of everyone, he kissed them both. These kisses were not lustful but rather transcended the hatred and boundaries imposed by war and race. Schindler's kiss inevitably brought him trouble. He was taken from his factory and imprisoned. As a Nazi party member, Schindler should have known that kissing Jewish girls was a crime, yet he did it anyway, whether it was out of genuine affection and compassion for the Jews or a way to express his dissatisfaction with the rules. Only Schindler knew. Fortunately, his good connections in the military smoothed things over. Another health inspection arrived in the camp, which meant that some people would be eliminated. To appear healthier, the women pricked their fingers and smeared blood on their cheeks to look more flushed. Everyone was forced to strip naked and run around the playground. Those who couldn't keep up would be eliminated. Those who passed the inspection felt as if they had returned from the brink of death, temporarily safe. Meanwhile, ignorant children were loaded onto trucks. Older children, realizing the significance of this, tried to escape. One boy slipped back into the barracks unnoticed by the Germans, only to find every hiding place already occupied. With no other option, he jumped into the latrine pit, where other children were hiding. The children shooed him away, fearing he would attract the soldiers. He looked up with eyes full of unknown fear and a desperate desire to survive. Those who failed the inspection were crammed into trains, heading toward an unknown and certain death. The scorching weather and cramped space made the people inside the trains unbearably hot. Schindler nonchalantly suggested using water hoses to spray the train cars as if it were a game. Under Schindler's direction, water was sprayed on the cars, temporarily quenching the passengers' thirst. Schindler handed a basket of food and drink to the guards, asking them to spray water at every station. This was all Schindler could do for the doomed. Even Aman mocked him, saying that he was cruel because he gave these doomed people a false hope of life. Before winter even set in, snow suddenly began to fall from the sky, but upon closer inspection, it wasn't snow but ashes. The city's facilities and cars were covered in a thick layer. The German army had dug up over 10,000 corpses of Jews and incinerated them, leaving only ashes. On a cart carrying bodies, Schindler saw that familiar touch of red again. The difference was that the last time he saw it, it was alive. This time, it was dead. Schindler was deeply moved. The red was no longer a thorn but became a nail questioning his soul, deeply embedded in his heart, never to be removed. Schindler met with Stern again. Even Schindler's Stern could not escape fate. Schindler spoke helplessly about his future plans, saying he had earned enough money and didn't want to run the factory anymore if Stern was gone. He wanted to return to his countryside home. Stern, who never drank and never wanted to drink with Schindler, this time, with tears in his eyes, asked to have a drink with Schindler. After parting with Stern, Schindler packed his belongings and prepared to leave with the fortune he had earned. He stared out the window, thoughtful, whether it was Stern, the workers, or that innocent red figure, or perhaps all of them prompted him to make a decision. He decided to use the money he had earned to save as many Jewish lives as possible. Recalling from memory, he listed one Jewish name after another. Each name represented a saved soul, and together, these many names formed a ladder of life, at the top of which shone the light of humanity. This list of names is what we call Schindler's List. As he finished the last name, Schindler instructed to leave a blank space, reserved for Helen. To save Helen, he negotiated with Aman, ultimately paying 14,800 marks to take Helen away. All the saved Jews were divided into men and women, boarded trains, and were sent to Schindler's hometown. The train carrying the men arrived as scheduled. Schindler had been waiting, ready with hot soup and bread. However, the train carrying the women encountered a problem and was mistakenly sent to a crematorium, where ashes continuously floated in the air. Upon hearing this, Schindler rushed to save these women. He paid a high price once again. With many sparkling diamonds, the women and children were saved once more. Avoiding a fiery end and boarding the train again, Schindler brought them back to the factory and instructed the guards not to mistreat the workers. He warned them that any mistreatment would require compensation and forbade soldiers from entering the factory and interfering with the workers' lives and work. Schindler's factory became a true sanctuary for Jews. During the 7 months of full operation, Schindler's factory never produced a single usable weapon. This was because he never intended to produce any weapons. This resulted in significant financial loss for him, in addition to spending millions of marks to sustain his workers' livelihood and bribe the German army to ensure their safety. After a while, Schindler went bankrupt. Germany announced its unconditional surrender. Schindler, due to his identity as a Nazi party member and an arms manufacturer, became a wanted criminal. Before fleeing, the Schindlers received a letter signed by all the Jews he had saved, hoping it would help him if he was arrested. Stern handed him a gold ring, made from a gold tooth extracted by a Jew with the help and encouragement of others after drinking strong liquor. The ring bore an inscription from the Jewish Talmud: "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." Schindler solemnly placed the ring on his finger, his eyes filled with tears ready to fall. He began to regret not saving more people, muttering about the value of his remaining belongings and the number of lives they could save until he broke down in tears. No one had any reason to criticize him for not doing enough. They silently surrounded him, hugging the couple tightly. Dressed in new clothes, the Schindlers departed under the watchful eyes of the 1,100 Jews they had saved, embarking on their journey to flee. The next day, a Soviet officer arrived at the factory to announce the Jews' liberation. When Stern asked how many Jews were left in Poland, the Soviet officer fell silent. The 1,100 survivors walked side by side on the land of freedom, transitioning from black and white to color. After 195 minutes of black and white film, we finally saw vibrant colors for the first time. These were the colors of life and freedom. However, compared to the film, what kind of long and cruel ordeal did the surviving Jews in history go through? This film is based on real historical events. Aman was eventually sentenced to hanging for his crimes. Schindler, due to emotional differences, ultimately divorced his wife. In his later years, he was almost penniless and could only live on the aid of Jewish organizations. On October 9, 1974, Schindler passed away at the age of 67. His body was buried on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, making him the only former Nazi party member to be buried there. At the time this film was completed, only 4,000 Jews remained in Poland. However, the Jews saved by Schindler and their descendants have grown to 6,000 people. To commemorate Schindler, they refer to themselves as Schindler Jews. I am a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.